When we programmed the robot to stop on a button press in the last video, our initial intention probably wasn't to detect that the button was currently pressed, but rather we wanted to know whether the button had been pressed at all while the music was playing, even if it was pressed and then released. LEGO uses the term bump to refer to the act of having both pressed and then released the button on the touch sensor. Let's see how this works by changing the loop condition from checking whether the button is pressed to checking whether the button is bumped. There we go. So let's just look down here in the bottom right corner again at port view. And you know already that if I press the button, we get a 1 down there, right? And if I let go, we get a 0. And unfortunately, when you look at the port view for a touch sensor, it doesn't give you any information about being bumped. So I can press and release as many times as I want, and the port view of port 1 just tells me whether the button is currently pressed or currently released. While it doesn't show you information about bumped in port view, whenever you have a touch sensor in your program, the EV3 keeps track of whether that sensor has been pressed and released since you last checked. Both the press and release and the since you last checked is important. Suppose we press the button. Has the sensor been bumped yet? No, because you need a press and a release. Okay, so suppose we release the button. Now has the sensor been bumped? Yeah, absolutely. You had a press and a release. Now you've been bumped. What if we ask again right away whether the sensor has been bumped? Now the answer is no, because we haven't been bumped again since the last time we checked. So you should imagine that as we start our program, the EV3 keeps a note that the touch sensor has not yet been bumped. So let's start the program. And imagine that we press the button on the touch sensor just as that first note is being played. Note that the touch sensor is now pressed, but since bump is defined as being pressed and then released, the sensor has still not been bumped. Let's suppose that we release the button as that second note is being played. So now the button on the touch sensor has been both pressed and released, and the EV3 makes a note that a bump has happened. We continue on with the rest of our program, and when we reach the end of the loop and check whether the button's been bumped, the answer is yes. Note that as soon as we check the sensor, the EV3 now notes that the sensor has not been bumped, since it hasn't been bumped again since we last checked. So now we leave the loop, run the rest of the program, and then clean up. Let's just give that a shot.
Object detected.
Perfect.